Well, first of all, welcome everyone to u-nite, Unity Temple's weekly interspiritual service. I'm Reverend Nhien. I want to say shout out to our YouTube subscribers too. We're getting like one or two a week added on, so I want to make sure to thank you all for watching. And so u-nite is an interspiritual service, and what that means for us here is that while unity is both historically and culturally grounded in the teachings of Jesus, as opposed to the teachings about Jesus, teachings such as unconditional love, grace, and forgiveness. Even though we are grounded in that, we actively embrace practices and principles from the world's religious and spiritual traditions, understanding that all of them have something from which we can benefit. So interspirituality also is about, for us here, this idea that we don't come together to get everyone to believe in the same thing. Rather, the primary purpose of coming together is for a shared experience, ideally an experience of love, unity, and oneness. And so to that end, today's topic, which Jerome sang so mightily about, is on facing fear. And we're going to go into this at depth, but in some ways, the lyrics of the song we just heard kind of really touch on it, that in the end, there's this huge, important relationship between love, this all-encompassing love, and fear. And so that's what we'll explore here today. I also want to make a note that here we take a psycho-spiritual approach to growth in a way where, it's just not this highfalutin spirituality, but the spirituality that is grounded in our own psychology. And to that end, I often speak about a sacred tool of psychology, of ancient psychology, known as the Enneagram. And so you'll hear me talk about the Enneagram. Some of you are experts. For some of you, this is brand new. So just know that whatever level you're coming in at, this is just one way we can kind of look at these universal principles of love, unity, and oneness, and kind of ground it in, okay, what does that look like for me in the way that I act in my everyday life? And so hopefully every time I share about it, I share in a way that even if you don't know the Enneagram, that you can still derive some benefit from it. So in the Buddhist tradition, there is a tale that's often told of a monk who lived in isolation in this cave, this massive cave. And every day, he was also an artist. So every day he would paint murals on the walls of these caves. And he would do so, not just, as a painter, but as a meditation exercise. So there he was, every day meditative and mindfully painting these murals of the things that he saw in his mind's eye. And over time, over many years, he got so good that if you looked at those images, they would look real. And one day, to his credit or to his detriment, one day, one night, he finished the painting of this ferocious tiger. And he painted it massively on the cave wall. He goes to bed, wakes up the next morning, forgot he had painted it, wakes up the next morning to the image of this tiger, and boom, looking at the image that he created, he was scared to death. Scared to death. And so the story goes, looking at the image that he had created, it looked so lifelike that the monk was scared to death. And as we hear stories like this, there's a part of me that's like, oh, he didn't really die. So what does this story mean? My question, the question that was posed to me in reading this story, is what in me, what images have I created on the mural, on the cave walls of my life that have scared me to death? And maybe not, of course, a literal death, But things scare us in this life that cause us to die in little ways. We die to our dreams. We set them aside. We die in that we numb out. And there's a way in which, it's sort of like even wanting more or feeling it's too scary. And so the images of the things that we fear, some of us fearing failure, other of us fearing success, some of us fearing loneliness, and others of us fearing intimacy and closeness, and oftentimes a combination of the two. And in these images that we fear, we shut down a part of ourselves in a way, and symbolically numb out in a way that is like a death. And so I want to invite each of us here to begin by even considering, as a practical matter, what are you afraid of today? And not just, are you just generally afraid of, like, oh, I'm afraid of spiders. What are you afraid of that is actually limiting you in your highest expression? Are you afraid of rejection? Can you see how being afraid of rejection, whether it's on a career level, whether it's in an interpersonal level, might be impacting the fullness of your life today? Do you fear financial insecurity, such that you spend so much of your energy and time amassing a savings that you're not actually out there enjoying and living your life? In what ways have you shut down because of something that you just terribly fear? So we begin in this way with this invitation first to make this service about what is alive for you. And perhaps if you're like me, where there's a phase of my life where I was so unconscious to being afraid, that my first instinct is, I'm not afraid of anything, I just feel angry all the time, and realizing that beneath the surface of some of these things is an underlying fear. So if you can sink in and down, to feel into that, then you and what's alive for you is the topic for today. So today I want to explore the topic of facing fears in 3 parts. First, I'd like to talk about exploring, naming, identifying our biggest fears, our core fears. Because, we can't face them until we acknowledge them, until we make them conscious, if you will, right? But then the second part is, well, now that I see, what do I do about it? Because a lot of times, some of us have reached the stage in our development where we're like, I know what it is. I know what my problem is. I just don't know how to fix it, right? I don't know how to overcome it. I don't know how to address it. So in the second part, we'll talk about how welcoming or embracing fear in its many disguises, fear with its many faces, different for each of us, depending on our Enneagram type often, that by welcoming and embracing it, ironically, rather than resisting it or acting around it, if you will, trying to avoid it, is actually the path of healing and being able to step forward in the midst of even still having some feelings of being afraid, if you will, to step forward in faith. And then finally, I want to talk about how, we talk here about being awake, spiritually awake, and enlightened, if you will. So it's important for me to talk about how the work that we do here, our inner and personal work, isn't just for us alone. But there is a way in which facing our fears is something we do for the collective awakening and the collective good. So 3 parts today. So let's begin then with facing fears. So the Enneagram can be very helpful in giving a framework for facing fears. And so on the Enneagram, there are 9 basic points on the Enneagram that describe that are maybe personality types that can be said to be driven by one core fear. And so maybe even if you don't know your Enneagram type, you might be like, oh yeah, That's my basic fear. For the type 9 on the Enneagram, there is this like core or basic fear of disconnection. Just like that I already feel in a way that I'm separate from God, separate from Source. And so the 9's strategy in life is often to merge, to blend in with its groups or its partner or with that type 9's surroundings in a way that somehow, if I blend in, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be worth something. And so there's a deep fear, though, that I'm not part of. I don't belong, like, to all of this. Like you all do, but not me. And so this deep fear of disconnection that comes from that. And then for the type 1 on the Enneagram, which happens to be my type, there is this basic fear of being defective or somehow bad. Like that, before I came to Unity, that teaches that we are inherently, fundamentally good. I spent the bulk of my life thinking, you know what, I'm a bad person, but if I do good enough things, if I perfect myself, then I will earn this degree of like goodness, this badge. And that was my old strategy, but there's still this underlying haunting thing within all type 1s of like, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe if you come to know me, then you'll come to know that I'm defective. I recently really came to own that, wow, I still have a certain degree of fear of intimacy and of like letting people in really close. Like you can get around here, but like not to like my daily life. Like, I'm not gonna know that much, and really getting that, oh my goodness, this goes to the basic fear of the type 1. Because out here, you're not gonna see the details of who I really am, and you're not gonna see the imperfection and the defectiveness, right? So if I keep you at bay, then I can still continue to work to improve until one day that maybe I'll be good enough. And so even understanding that behind that is this like deep fear that, oh, I'm somehow broken. There's something bad or wrong. So the type 2 on the Enneagram is the type that generally has this deep fear that they are unworthy of love. Unworthy of love, like intrinsically, right? And so the type 2 strategy is like, if you need me, I'll make myself indispensable because now you need me, and so you'll stay around because I'm actually not lovable just in and of myself. But if you need me, if I make myself indispensable to specific people, then they will not abandon me. The type 3 on the Enneagram, and we all have flavors of this, but this is the core to the type, core fear, is that I am not inherently lovable. I am not inherently valuable. So my value comes from my doing, my success, my achievement, but I never can seem to do enough to fill that hole, to fill that gap of like, actually, I'm not valuable. So these trophies, these awards, your accolades is going to tell me that I'm valuable because of this core fear that I may not address. But instead, what will I do? I'll keep doing and doing and doing and achieving to never actually face that core fear that I'm not valuable intrinsically, innately, exactly as I am in my being versus in my doing. And for the type 4 on the Enneagram, there's this fear that I don't really have identity. I don't have personal significance. And so for those who know, like type 4s, they have a special need to be special. It's like to compensate for what I actually don't feel, which is personally significant. So I need to, dress specially, have special musical tastes, like that exquisite, elitist art. The things that make me stand out and special are to compensate for this deep-seated belief that actually I don't have personal identity or significance. And that type 5 on the Enneagram, has this basic fear. What if I'm useless? Like maybe like this fear of being useless or incompetent, not capable. And so the 5 researches and tries to learn and know, but is often too timid to step into the world and take action. You can study a lot before you'll even teach, because of this basic like, oh, I don't know enough, and if I actually try, I might prove myself right, which is this fear that I'm incompetent, like as this base core anxiety that I hold. But then some of us that identify with type 6 on the Enneagram, there's this fear of being without support or without guidance. And so I form my life around trying to amass either support in the form of friendships or support in the form of financial support or guidance in terms of, checking the people in my life for advice, So there's a way in which I will try to compensate for this basic fear instead of necessarily facing the fear. And for the type 7s on the Enneagram, the enthusiasts, the fun-loving types, there's a fear of being trapped, and trapped especially in pain, a fear of being limited, a fear of being deprived. And so the 7s all out, every activity that's possible. Do not force me into a box. Do not force me to commit to this one thing, because there could be 10 things, and yet in this compulsive seeking for the next new thing, I never land in a place of like peace and happiness, because I don't want to face this core fear of like what it would be like if I had to stay still, to stand still, to not reach out and grab for the next new thing. And then finally, the 8, as we go around the entire Enneagram of 9 types, the 8 basic core fear is that of being hurt or controlled by another. And hurt often in the form of betrayal. And so the 8 builds this huge, strong exterior. And what does that exterior create? Oh, this strength, this muscle. It creates a wall that no one can penetrate. So there the 8 lives in an aloneness from intimacy, from allowing its vulnerability because of its fear of being hurt, controlled, betrayed. And so there's a way that before we become conscious of this underlying fear that sort of propels us into action to secure in the outer these things that will help us not have to face that. Before that happens, all we do is run around trying to compensate for that. And the idea is that if we can begin to embrace our fears, we go to another place. And I'll talk about that in part 2. But I want to even say this, that there's a way in which each of these fears, at least from the Enneagram and a unity perspective, that even these aren't our core fears. We would say that these are the core fears of each of the personality types. But beneath that, if we sink into it, there's a deeper fear. Now, thinking about core fears, I actually went to see a movie recently about Dora the Explorer. And it's funny because I don't have any kids, and so this is based on a cartoon character, Dora the Explorer, whom I'm guessing is a 7 on the Enneagram, like this, this explorer, this adventurer. But in this, I was really struck because, again, since I don't have kids, I don't often watch like children's films, and there's a way in which these really tend to get at universal life themes, right? Because they speak to kids. And so I'm watching and I'm looking at how there she is out in the jungle, a place that most of us would be like scared, right? Because it's foreign to us, being out in the jungle. And she is fearless out there and she's adventuring, she feels prepared, she's got everything it takes. And so in this show, her parents take her out of the jungle and send her into society. Yeah, right, like that, into society. And so what struck me is what is most of our core fear? What is like the scariest thing in the world? Well, in this case, according to the movie, high school. You know, like, remember high school? Like, high school for most of us is scary and kind of traumatic. It's sort of like, and I look back to this, and she's like facing high school and all these issues of, am I going to belong? Am I going to fit in? But watching this movie, I was struck by how in high school, we are in these formative years of identity, right? And so this idea that in high school, the things that can disrupt that, the sense of not fitting in with the other kids, not doing the right thing, not knowing how to navigate it, like all this sense of deep insecurity wells up. And so in that, I remember feeling into how, you know, sometimes now as an adult, I can still go back to this place of feeling fearless. But like if I feel into like the kid in me, yeah, there's a part of me that still wants to be liked by everybody. You know, like there's a part of me that has this, if I can feel into my high school self, then I can feel into some of the rawness of maybe what hasn't quite been healed yet, what I'm still afraid of about my place in the world, you know, whether I have to do this stuff on my own. What are the stories and tapes that I built around life even back then? The fear of having to be self-reliant and not being supported by people, whatever the fear is. But even then, as I sat with that, I realized this. And let's go to the slide on, oh, okay, we're already there, the inner triangle. As I pondered even that, you know, I felt into, there are fears that we feel around how we show up in the world, right? Like, are people going to like me? Are they going to respect me? You know, we have fears about, like, am I going to be just supported? Are there going to be enough resources here? You know, is it competitive? Will I make it? All these basic fears. And the Enneagram helps us to identify something maybe even more core to that. And I'll have to take a step back to explain this framework so that we can kind of move forward into understanding. So here in Unity, there is a profound belief that who you are is innately whole and perfect. Remember that we are born not in original sin, but in original blessing. And so the coming into this world is really a fall from grace that's represented by the inner triangle of the Enneagram. And the idea is this, that these numbers on the Enneagram represent personality types, but the Enneagram, in its sort of broadest sense, is also a map of consciousness, of your consciousness, in one symbol. So the idea that all the points are aspects of you. The point 9 on the Enneagram is said to symbolize at the very top that point of separation. Remember that the 9's basic fear is lack of connection? So the idea is that I'm separate from God. I'm separate from oneness. I'm separate from source. Somehow I plopped out of God. You know, that somehow that we're not, that I'm a lone player in the world. And so that's symbolized by 9 and meant to be true of all of us. Whoa. Oh no, what are we going to do? Well, the first thing we experience is the core experience of the type 6 on the Enneagram. And what is that? Fear, anxiety, existential anxiety. We're talking about, holy crap, right? Like, I'm not one with God. I have to fend for myself. This is a scary world. I'm finite. I'm little compared to this bigger world. So we go down from 9 down to 6. And in 6, there's this profound anxiety. But who wants to feel that? And so instead of staying in this place of dealing with this core fear that oh my gosh, the universe and I am separate. I'm separate from love. I am separate from my source. I'm separate from goodness. I'm separate from wisdom and infinite resource. I'm separate. Anxiety. So what happens is we move to point 3 on the Enneagram, which is in the image center of the Enneagram. Point 3 represents our persona, our personality type. So in some ways, all of the 9 I described are exhibited at point 3. So here we are at point 3. I decide the way I'm going to make it on my own. I'm on my own. I don't want to feel this. But if I make myself lovable enough, if I make myself knowledgeable enough, if I make myself indispensable enough, right? If I make myself secure enough, if I make myself powerful enough, right? If I run towards fun and excitement and plan for my good enough, I will be okay. I will be okay. So there we are, all of us at some level, at point 3, running around, trying to uphold this idea of, I've got the strategy that's going to make me okay. And then for most of us, when we encounter fear, the first fear we encounter is the fear of what will hurt our persona, not our core self. The 3 fears failure, right? It fears failure, but really, if you fail, what happens? What actually happens? Usually, it's not the failure that takes you down, right? It's the stories or the feelings of, the shame, right? That we don't want to feel when we avoid that. Even like the greatest physical distress we can imagine, there's something in it that like, it's about the story I tell about it that is what I'm really afraid of, right? And so for me, yeah, like what if I'm found out? What if someone gets close to me and they see, like, oh, you're not so perfect, you're damaged, like that it's not so much that happening, but what I feel about myself, what I fear about myself, right? And so, if we know that, then we can begin to live our greatest potential, to see the path that we like really want to embody, and see that, it's superficial to just say, oh, just face your fears and kind of move out and do it. Instead of going, hey, let's feel into what's really going on here. There's something deeper than just what feels like a fear of intimacy. In the end, what we all fear is if we are one with God, we are completely annihilated in that love. What if we sank deep enough into all of our core fears, the fear that our personality is annihilated in a way that takes us home into the love of the universe? The fear that, like, we have to actually go back and trail back from the superficial fear at the point of our persona at the 3, go back into the profound existential fear at point 6, that somehow I'm separate from God, and come back up into love. Next. And how perfect in the Bible, perfect love casts out all fear. The beauty and grace of the Enneagram. There's something called the Enneagram of holy ideas. At every point, there is like a holy idea, a face of God that we're missing at that point. And it was beautiful for me to see how overlaying this gives us a map home. It's like, oh my goodness, all of us sitting at point 3 and going, oh, well, I don't believe in the ultimate harmony and flow and the outworking of the law of the universe, but when I can reclaim that I am part of the harmonious flow of the one life. Here in Unity, we teach there is only one power and one presence active in your life, God the good, in all, through all, and overall. And that outpictures as this holy harmony that moves through your life. If you can let yourself surrender the activities that you've been doing to nurture your egoic structure and fall into that grace, you feel the way that holy law upholds you, and that holy hope brings you forward into a place where maybe you can feel into the anxiety in a way where you can return to a ground of faith. And in that faith, inevitably, the faith that sees not with the outer eyes, but sees with the inner eye, that faith that knows that that you are love itself, that you are one, that you are held in this infinity of love, right? It brings you home. And it so happens that the holy idea at point 9 is holy love. Perfect love casts out all fear. The two cannot abide together. And all this sounds very, highfalutin, fun, whatever, maybe not fun, highfalutin. But how do we do this? How do we do this? So there are many paths, I know, to spirit. The path that has really transformed my life the most happens to be one from the mystical Catholic tradition, of all things, mystical Catholic, and it's called welcoming prayer. So the beauty of this is that all we have to do to live our highest life is to face the fear that we're conscious of. But not face it by telling a story about it and sucking up and getting over it anyway, but instead by embracing it and welcoming it. So we don't have to go dig up this deep fear of separation with God. We start at the surface of our being. We start with the fear right in front of us. What is your fear? And have you actually sat with the fear? Or do you, like most of us tend to do, instead of feeling the fear, you tell stories about it. You try to conjure up solutions to try to resolve it, thinking mind, or you run out into the world, into action, to conquer it. And even some ways, when people say, oh, well, I'm going to face my fears by doing all these daredevil things, some people do that. I'm like, well, if you're compulsively doing these things just to prove yourself you're not fearful, you're spending a lot of extra energy over here that you could be living your highest life maybe, So you're recognizing how fear can drive us to go prove stuff in the world of action. But what if instead we did a form of welcoming that enabled us to sit with it? I shared recently in a few different one-on-one counseling sessions something, and how sometimes something comes out of your mouth, you're like, that's true, and I realized, that when we don't want to feel a feeling, that we either think or act to avoid feeling and experience the life that is before us. So what if instead, the next time you had something, you could tell, it makes you constrict, right? You think about it, it makes you hold yourself tensely, this fear. So you go back to that. So next time, you're aware of how, maybe it relates to a medical issue, physical issue. Maybe it relates to a relationship issue. Maybe it relates to a financial issue, a performance issue at work, that kind of thing. But as you let yourself feel it, first feel what's before you, because you might feel anger first. You might feel shame first. The fear is beneath that, but start with what you have. So let's assume you've done this work to welcome and feel this, and I'll actually guide you through a welcoming prayer thing during our meditation time. As you sink into that, you let it finally move through you. Because most of us, the way we're taught in society, isn't to feel what we're feeling. At the moment we feel any kind of distress, we start analyzing it if we're smart. Like we've learned all the psychology behind it. I know exactly why I do this. And yet we still commit the act, right? But we never let ourselves just sink into the experience. It's scary to go in there. So we allow ourselves this way in which we feel it so it can finally move through us. And then as it moves through us in this more centered and peaceful place, yes, we might have strategies. We might take some action, but they don't come from the fear. They come from a groundedness in this knowing of oneness. And so we do that. We take that opportunity to actually welcome with gentleness, with unconditional acceptance, the feeling that is before us without analyzing it, without having to act on it. Somehow, this transforms. Maybe because love and unconditional acceptance are the same thing, and perfect love casts out fear. Maybe. And so welcoming prayer is something that I encourage and invite you to try it out, apply during the week. Why is this now? So if we look at the way the triangle moves, we go back into union, the oneness with God. So as I was sharing, a shout out to Pastor Jeff Gannon. He and I are chatting. He is the senior minister at Chapel Hill United Methodist Church in Wichita and reached out to me about doing a few different trainings at his community on the Enneagram. So we were chatting this week about that. And in the context of that, of course, minister to minister, I'm talking about my Sunday sermon. And out of his mouth, United Methodist Church, I would have never thought, out of his mouth comes a quotation from Gerald Jampolsky, who wrote this book called Love is Letting Go of Fear, based on A Course in Miracles, which is my primary metaphysics, okay? A Course in Miracles is how I found unity. So, oh, beautiful synchronicity there. But out of his mouth comes this quotation, which I'll just paraphrase, and the opposite of love. Let's think about the way fear has been working in our society and the world. So the opposite of love is not actually hatred, he says. The opposite of love is fear. Fear unchecked, right? That leads to hatred, right? The most hateful person is the most scared person. And so I know when I heard this quote, and I know that when other friends might hear it, there's a tendency to look outside ourselves and go, yep, that's what they're doing over there. That's what that group of people are doing. That's what's happening. From a unity perspective, the point is always to look at ourselves and to look at how we take part in the collective building up or amassing of fear when we do not do our own work in order to sort of address that fear. The fear lives collectively in our consciousness. And so we can understand how allowing for a place where we live from fear, even unconsciously, right? Because here we are at the point of 3, not even knowing all this muck is inside of us, living unconsciously in that way and having it out picture in our society as a group. Now, if you've never heard of Jampolsky, many of you have heard of Yoda, the great teacher Yoda. Next slide. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. Just another way of putting it. That wisdom. And so, from the great teacher Yoda, right, we're reminded of this just universal truth and how by doing our work, by doing our individual work, we contribute to less hatred and less suffering in the world at large, if we're willing. And now, Joseph Campbell, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. And so, in our putting around each day, in the way that we're like, I've got the plan. This is how I'm going to make it. This is how I'm going to feel okay about myself. I fear just becoming still and letting myself feel the vulnerability of feeling my own feelings, right? And so oftentimes, too often, I think this quote is misinterpreted to talk about the cave you fear to enter as being something in the world that you need to be doing. But no, I mean, we can courageously often act in the world and never be willing to really go within, into the scary place within ourselves. So the invitation is to take what appears to be an outer fear and allow ourselves to drop into that experience, feel it, right? In a way that enables it to transmute and transform, go back until we feel even into our basic fear. And then beneath that fear, in the cave that seems so scary and so dark, we find that we are the light itself, right? But we do that by going within in times in the silence. And so I'm going to invite us now to engage that time, and I'll lead us into a time of welcoming prayer where you're invited, optional always, to enter into it through a personal fear of yours. So I invite you to close your eyes and take a deep and cleansing breath. And as you breathe, I invite you to consider a feeling to bring to mind or heart. Just what you're feeling right now. It may not be fear. It may be something on top of fear. It could be judgment or resentment. It could be shame. It can help to be specific. If you can't feel into something, just think of one thing that's coming up. Expecting to hear from your doctor, expecting to see a relative, expecting to talk to your boss, to have a certain conversation with a friend. What comes up for you? I invite you, instead of thinking about the feeling that comes up, to sink into the feeling as a sensation in your body. Where is it? Is it in your gut, your chest, your head? Maybe it's a constriction in your throat. I invite you to feel it and sink into it as best you can without telling a story about it, silencing your mind, allowing yourself to feel the pure sensation in your body for a few seconds here now on your own in the silence. Now, staying with the sensation in your body, I invite you to now bring in an awareness of spirit, by whatever name you refer to this higher power, your highest self. Welcome, spirit. Welcome, love. And then to yourself, as if you are the best host or hostess in the world. Welcome this feeling in your body. And do that just for a few more seconds on your own. This feeling of welcome. You are bigger than this feeling. And as you continue to have this sense of welcoming what is within you, I invite you to make my words your words in the silence as I share this prayer. I let go of the need for control or power around this feeling or situation. I let go of the need for approval or esteem around this feeling or situation. I let go of the need for certainty and security around this feeling or situation. I let go of the need to change anything about this feeling or situation. I let go. And allow this feeling to move through me. And so it is. Amen. Perfect love casts out all fear. And so it is. Amen. Namaste. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I encourage you to do that. We can include the meditation on the YouTube recording so that you could review it, but maybe slow it down so you have a chance to be with your feelings ever more deeply, because we all want to do that, right, during the week.